Lorraine here speaking with VFX Supervisor of Marvel Studios WandaVision, Tara DeMarco. Hey, Tara.
Hi, Lorraine.
It's so great to get to talk to you. I'm so thrilled to talk about this show because it is such a love letter to classic television.
Yeah, Kevin Feige really wanted us at every turn to stay as authentic to period filmmaking as we could.
Was there anything that you found really surprising about working in black and white?
The most surprising thing about working in black and white is then looking at the color, because you'll see some crazy colors that were done with our production design and our costume department because they all knew they would film better. So red films quite dark on the sensor. It just goes super, super dark and unreadable. We were losing Vision's features. So we did 2 days of makeup palette testing where we tried all different shades of blue and different shades of sheen, because some of that performance we keep, like some of that face is the real face. And we augment it with CG, clearly, but Paul as an actor is so expressive, and particularly when he was channeling his sitcom self, he was so expressive, and we didn't want to lose any of that.
Early on in the season, we get to see Wanda in her 1950s paradise. She is having a lot of magical fun in the kitchen. Where did you decide what's going to be practical and what's going to be VFX?
We would all sit around a table and decide as a group. We would decide with props and special effects and production design and talk about the dimensions of the set and what we wanted the effect to be and what we wanted to see or feel. Did we need the actors to be able to see that thing practically moving through space, or did it just appear? So we would all discuss the parameters, and then we would dive in and figure out, like, okay, well, this one thing would be great on wires because there's no way you're going to be able to cheat the effect of a puppeteer like bobbling an item through space. Like, that's a surprisingly hard thing to do in CG, is recreate the hand of an old school puppeteer working on wires.
It's pretty wild to see the footage from behind the scenes because you don't realize how close the puppeteers are. What were some of the ways that items were puppeteered?
All of them. So we puppeteered things from the ceiling, we did them from the floor, we tried all of the ways. So really it was about looking, okay, what's the best way to get the effect we want? And then how do you rig that? And it's like, oh, well, you put a wire from one side of the living room through the set window and then have someone pull it across.
So once you have all of this wonderful puppeteering put together with the actors in their scene, how do you take that into VFX and make it all one seamless product?
We take all of our in-camera elements, all of the pieces with puppeteered wires still in them, and then get to work at removing all of those wires and rods and everything else. And then we take that scene as prepped and go to CG with our director, and he might say, can I have a rolling pin, or can you make me one more of those cookie jars? And then we'll begin modeling those items with colors that are CG friendly for black and white. And we'll lay them out in the scene, do animation that is janky enough that it could have been done by a human with a rod or a wire. We didn't want anything too smooth, because then we would give up the gag with everything that was done with wires.
I especially love the moment where Wanda finds out that she's pregnant and the whole room goes from black and white into this bloom of color. Where did you start with this process when you knew you had to take the world into color?
We were really encouraged by the studio to look at film effects that could have happened in the era. And so the 60s, the film effects that could happen in the era were all about optical printing and how you could expose different bits of film and then re-expose them together in an optical printer. And we took inspiration from that and thought, what if you separated out the color channels and really warped them to be separate from one another, and then we're able to re-expose them and layer them? And that's the effect that creates the color bloom. And so we ended up with an effect that would have been tricky to do in the 60s, but at least was true to the principles. And then our little stars that are animated around were a nod to animating on the film from that era.
So when Wanda and Vision are getting into nesting mode, setting up the nursery, there's some really charming moments that happen as things start to literally take shape. What were some of the ways that was shot to trick the eye?
The crib coming together was filmed with wires, with puppeteers. The paintbrushes we did both ways. There were some puppeteered paintbrushes that I think ultimately we used for reference, and we did CG paintbrushes.
In that scene, there's also some wonderful moments, my favorite being the butterfly mobile. What was the initial idea for how much of that you could really do practically, as butterflies I don't imagine are super cooperative?
Butterflies are not super cooperative, but one of the butterflies on Paul's nose is real, and the others are all CG. So we wanted at least one so that we could see how it moved and see what it looked like and see that contact and actually just the wonder in their faces when we had this real live butterfly attached to Paul's nose. Pretty incredible. And then what we decided to do was animate the butterflies, and that allowed us, that opened us up to make it more fantastical, because if we had had real butterflies, you know, they have phenomenal colors, but they might not exactly match our nursery mobile. And this allowed us to art direct them a little closer to the mobile and get that perfect transition moment.
So we have the epic moment where Vision meets Vision. How do you make them look like they're both Vision while giving them their own distinct look?
The new Vision was designed by Marvel's very own Viz Dev team. He has an identical body, but a slightly different costume. He has an identical head, but slightly different panel shapes. And we gave him an interesting new synthezoid eye. Things that are important differences: the new Vision doesn't have a Mind Stone, so we put something Mind Stone-esque in the area where the Mind Stone was.
So the interesting thing that comes with filming this kind of scene, you have two Visions, you have one Paul Bettany. How do you then shoot that scene to put it together in post?
We shoot the scene twice. So we shot every scene with Paul as the hero, and then he would act opposite one of his stunt doubles so that every performance is Paul.
So once you have two Pauls and you've got him into one shot, how do you then create a logic battle?
We take all of the elements from the set, we'll cut them all out and assemble them into scenes so that we feel like it's all one scene, and then we figure out what additional enhancements need to happen so that they really sit together. Does it mean a little bit of set extension or some atmosphere, or tracking one Vision into the other's original photography so that they share a camera move? Whatever we need to do to make them both feel like they're really there.
And they're in a library. How was that shot? Was that a library? Did you create one?
We scouted a library that ultimately we decided we couldn't shoot there because we needed to hang them quite high, and this little library didn't really want us to destroy their space. So we found it, loved it, photographed it, and then we went back to our stage and built 3/4 of it for real so that we could practically hang and spin them on a second floor so that we could get the shots from down below of them talking and spinning, and so we could get some shots drifting with them as they're on the second floor. Ultimately, we ended up rebuilding a bunch of that library in CG, including the dome and the skylight, just so we would have full control, but it was massively helpful to have a real set, and a lot of that set lives in the final film.
Are there any layers or different things that you put on top to raise the stakes of that feeling?
Absolutely. We put bits of paper and laser beams. We have exploding wood, and we cut through the floor. So you end up with lots of stuff in the air and some stuff coming towards lens that helps the viewer feel like they're really in the middle of this tense battle beat.
Looking back at this process, working on this entire series, the first Disney Plus series for the MCU, what has been sort of your favorite component or part of getting to work on this process?
I think my favorite part of working on this process has been working with the director and the studio in the new character development. Every time someone else is introduced, I'm like, ooh, who is that and how cool is it? And now we've been able to contribute to that.
Thank you so much, Tara. It was so wonderful talking to you. Everyone, be sure to watch Marvel Studios' WandaVision, now streaming all episodes on Disney Plus.